I grew up, I was born in Mangalore in Karnataka, but I grew up in Pune. So I really consider myself, to be half Maharashtrian and half Kannadiga. My father worked here in Pune, and that's how we spent our entire lives here in Pune. I grew up here. I studied here. I went to college here, university here, and I'm working here. And after being married, now I'm settled here. So it's like, it's my home now. So growing up in the 1970s, when I look back, was a very nice era, I think, because A, we didn't have the kind of problems that we had today. And I always feel that we had a lot of free play, a lot of free time. Life was pretty unstructured at that time. So I grew up in a normal middle-class family. My mother was a housewife. And from both my parents, we imbibed the value of education, the value of excelling in what we did. And I think this is a very important value that has stayed with me, all my life. And this is the value that I also try to inculcate in my daughter as well. So I had a younger brother. And today when I reflect back, I can say that there was never any differentiation between me and my brother. In fact, I think that even today, he sometimes feels that, I was preferred, over him. So everything that we did, including the housework, we did it together. And I think that's something that he carries on to his family as well when he, helps his wife with their housework. So it was that kind of an upbringing. But the focus to excel and the focus, to pursue academics was very, very strong when I grew up. Having done my bachelor's here in Pune, I did my master's in environmental sciences at the Department of Environmental Sciences, University of Pune. Following which I started to work at the Bharati Vidyapeeth University. So at the Institute of Environmental Education and Research, which was a very newly formed institution at that time, way back in 1993. And it was the vision of the founder of this university, to have a course which brings in value and which enables transformation, in society. So it was on this basis that this institution was formed. And today it has really grown into an institution that has had influence on policy at various levels. So I did my PhD much later in life, but that was also in environmental sciences. And I think that doing it later in life enabled me to bring in a very practical aspect into the thesis, making sure that, it was used and is being used, for conservation. So primarily, I'm a landscape ecologist. But by virtue of doing landscape ecology, which means you're looking at conservation, across the landscape, not sort of, within a small area, you need different kinds of tools. And that was my first introduction into this field of geoinformatics or geospatial technology. So that using this basically in understanding how land use, land cover changes, they affect the distribution of species, across the landscape. So while I started off as being a landscape ecologist, along the way, I sort of initially self-taught myself about geospatial technologies, and later on, I did a course in geoinformatics at CDAC Pune, allowing me to venture deeper into this particular very interesting field. It's an eye in the sky, and as individuals, we normally think, oh my God, I can see everything around myself, but that's not really true, because your eyes are limited by the 0.4 to 0.7 micrometer, bandwidth that you can see on the electromagnetic spectrum, but the satellites, they see so much more. And that opens up a completely interesting field. So around 2010, I got more deeply involved with geospatial technologies, moving into, the application of this technology in different sectors, the health sector, the urban space sector, urban planning sector, disaster management, things like that. And environmental education has always been a passion which has been close to my heart. And I work at the Institute of Environmental Education and Research at the Bharati Vidyapeeth University. So environmental education is, very much in the DNA of this institution. So it's a passion. So I wear three hats: conservation, ecology, geospatial technologies, and environmental education. And over a period of time, I realized that there is no strict compartmentalization, between any of these fields. And one can really bring value to the work that we do, especially if you are able to incorporate a completely different aspect and a completely different point of view. So this is something that I also realized when I was working on understanding the effects of land use and land cover on black buck, which is an endangered antelope in India. And I was working in the Great Indian Bustard Sanctuary here in Maharashtra, which at that point in time was spread over 8,444 square kilometers. And it's very difficult to conserve an animal that moves across the landscape within areas that are largely inhabited by people. And such a problem cannot be studied only from ecological point of view. One needs to look at the social aspects, one needs to look at the policy aspects, one needs to look at politics itself, because political ecology plays a very important role, in how the landscape is shaped. And this was my first venture into understanding that when you look at a problem, it's not enough to look at it from one lens, but looking at it from a completely different lens can give you a different perspective. So I ended up with a thesis that was very highly appreciated because it delved deeper into what actually drives the land use, land cover change in the area. And if one has to really, stem the problem, the approach does not really come from the conservation field, but maybe it comes from the political field. Yeah, so it was very interesting, and that opened my eyes to the possibilities of interdisciplinary research. So, years later, when I've started teaching at the University of Cologne in Germany, with whom we have a long-standing partnerships, when people used to ask, "Oh, what field do you work in?" And I used to say, "Yeah, conservation ecology, landscape ecology, that's my first, but I also dabble in this, and I also do that, and I also do that." I could see a sort of strange look on their faces, because they're back in Europe, this concept, okay, that you have to be a specialist. You really can't be a generalist. But I'm very happy to say now that, even at the University of Cologne, we do have an interdisciplinary research group. At the university also, we have a faculty of interdisciplinary studies. And I try to advocate this aspect wherever I, talk to students, asking them to, move out of the comfort zones and silos that our own expertise sort of puts us in, and to look at the problem from another lens, because I really believe that that's how new knowledge can today be generated. So I think it's important that we inculcate in students the ability of how to learn rather than, what to learn. Because when you do how to learn, then discipline is no longer a barrier. Yeah, so this is what I do. So currently I'm vice principal at the Institute of Environmental Education Research within the university. And I try to use this interdisciplinary approach in all the programs that we run. I always loved nature. I always, loved trekking. And way back when I studied in the early 90s, environmental sciences was not offered, all across India. It was a very, very new field. In fact, people didn't even know, okay, what would you do becoming an environmentalist? Yeah. So, so there was this course at the University of Pune, which offered a master's in environmental sciences. And it was just, okay, I love nature. I would love to study more about it. And that's one of the reasons that I got into it. So in that sense, when I look at my own learning space, I think I've learned much more after joining the course and starting to work very intensively in the field. So earlier on, if you ask me, and I'm being very honest, yeah, okay, I would like to do that, but it wasn't like, okay, I was okay, I really need to do this. I knew I liked it, but the possibilities, the enormous possibilities of this field were not visible to me at that time. Right? It's only when, I did the degree and I started working here at the institute, the enormous possibilities of, what could be, what can be done, was very evident. So I would say that in my journey, and even as the environmental sort of sector came to the forefront in India, there were a lot of opportunities where one could use your expertise to bring about changes in the ground. And I think the ability to bring changes on the ground, coupled with my love for nature, is, I think, what initially drove me to this field. So I've loved every moment of the life that I've led. I've traveled extensively across India, implementing projects, doing projects, um, understanding various issues. I mean, it's been a hell of a ride. So when you reflect back on this question, all through my life at different phases, there have been different people, who have influenced me, and it has stayed. So initially, in my initial phase, it was, of course, my mother. She brings a kind of discipline that she, implements even today in her life. She's 75 years old, but the kind of discipline that she has, waking up at 4 a.m. in the morning and doing her task. So this is something that I've imbibed from her. As we move on through school, I studied in a convent school, and it was probably the only convent in that area at that time. It was run by Swiss nuns, and they brought with themselves also very strict discipline. I had this teacher, Miss Mary Zacharias, in class one, who was, I think, my first influence, because, at that age, you're really very impressionable. And, you clamor behind the teacher, she's everything to you, her word is the gospel truth, and so on. And fortunately, going against the rules of the school, we had her for the next 2 years, which has never happened before and has never happened afterwards. So in the initial years, she had a huge influence, on what I thought. And I think I could say the same for my class at that time. She was a huge influence, in the way we learned, the things that we imbibed from her. And as you go on through life, you then meet different people. And I think each one of them influences you in their own way. So my teacher in college, Dr. Hema Sane, who's really an epitome of simplicity, the simple life that she leads. Her house does not have electricity, even today. So she really doesn't believe in that. She stays here in the heart of Pune. So she doesn't really believe in that. So it's an absolutely simple life that she leads, which I think even I would find, very difficult, because we are used to certain comforts, but it grounds you. That kind of simplicity, grounds you, and it sort of, makes you question everything that you do. So it's the first lesson in, being less consumerist. And then working, with teachers, I work a lot with rural school teachers and rural school students. I work a lot with educators across the different states. And they do influence you quite a lot, because they are in these remote, far-flung areas, not paid very highly, and yet are motivated, to work for conservation. And that itself is a huge influence. So I think at every point in time of our lives, we do learn. I think there were many incidences, but I would recall one or two of them. So one is this project that we at the Institute implemented in 1998, which looked at analyzing school textbooks across India for their environmental content. So just to go back a little, Mr. M.C. Mehta, the very famous environmental lawyer, he had filed a public interest litigation in the Supreme Court, asking the Supreme Court, what are you doing to build environmental awareness among the citizens at large? And the court was stunned and said, what do you think we should do? He says, Article 48A and 51A, which specifically mentions a citizen's duty towards the environment, as well as the responsibility of the state. And both of these cannot be fulfilled, especially the citizen's duty, if they are not aware about environmental issues. And therefore, it's very essential to build knowledge or build environmental literacy among the population at large. So India is one of the only countries in the world that has actually used this kind of a public interest litigation to make environmental education, mandatory across the country. So in the light of this PIL, which took several years for implementation, we were asked we were contracted by the Ministry of Environment and Forests, Government of India, to analyze school textbooks across the country. And we thought, and they gave us a 6-month period, to do that. When we started doing the task, of course, we had laid out a methodology and, everything based on which we were awarded the study. When we started to work on it, we realized the difficulties that we face in actually doing this study, because we looked at around, there were about 1,883 textbooks that we needed to analyze in multiple languages, across the country. Being a small team, we realized that unless we trained a larger team in thinking the way we did, in analyzing those textbooks, we would never have an output. So 6 months stretched to about 3 years. So for 3 years, I lived textbooks, since I was also the coordinator of the project, analyzing this for their content in terms of the environment, the quality, does the content, promote environmental action or behavioral changes? And each of these textbooks had a report. So every textbook bureau across the country, they could actually take the report and say, okay, what's missing in my lesson? What can I put in there? And when you live textbooks for, 3 years, it becomes a part of your own DNA. So, when I used to read storybooks to my daughter when she was young, I automatically analyze, and I do that even today. Oh, why is it that the father is shown sitting with the son on the sofa watching the TV, while the daughter is shown, working with her mother in the kitchen, and we flag these kind of issues. So this, although it was, because this was about a bias, so we were also looking at biases, but we did flag gender biases as well, along with, other environmental biases that were there in the textbooks. And we really believe that things, if incorporated into the textbooks, would have a far-reaching effect. So this was one of those projects. And I also realized the power of textbooks, because as part of another parallel study, we were looking at, what is the largest selling at that point in time, which is almost 22 years ago, what is the largest selling environmental book in the country? Because we wanted to say, how can we build this environmental literacy among citizens? So we wrote to all the major organizations across the country and asked for their sales figures over the last 5 years. So the book that sold the highest numbers was 40,000 copies over 5 years. And what was it? It was Salim Ali's Book of Indian Birds. So wonderful book, really very wonderful book as a field guide. And that set us thinking, who would read this book? Only bird watchers. And is it enough if you're only going to reach bird watchers? Is that going to build environmental literacy in our country? And then we said, okay, let's look at textbooks. The reach is 12 to 14% of India's population. The textbook is the only book that reaches out to the most wilderness areas in the country. And therefore, if you get content and information into the textbooks, we are able to influence an entire generation. And we've really worked hard at that. So I would say that in a sense, it was a success. The NCRT took this up. We were only the consultants for doing this kind of a study, but the study was picked up. And under the supervision of the Supreme Court, the NCRT made environmental education mandatory across the country. It's still today being implemented. And at the same time, The UGC also decided to come up with a compulsory core module course on the environment. So for all undergraduate students, so whether you're doing medicine or engineering or law, even today you still have to complete this compulsory core module on environmental studies. India is the only country in the world, that has made this kind of a course mandatory across the board. And if you ask me, has this made a difference on the ground? Definitely yes. So if I look back on students that we would get 28 years ago to the kind of students that we get now, or to the kind of youth that I meet, and when I talk to them, there's definitely a much higher level of environmental awareness. And this is the thing about education. It can never show returns in the short term. It's not like, okay, I implemented a project and tomorrow I will see the result. It's never like that. It's always in the long term, 20 years, 30 years. So education works slowly, but it's the only way that you can turn around an entire nation. So I do believe in the power of education. And I think this was one of my most important lessons in my leadership journey, is what has the largest impact? Moving together with people, because all of these things could not have been done if we didn't have a large team who believed in the cause, of taking it forward. It also taught me the power of collaboration, of collaboration between academia and the government, academia and the NGOs. And it taught me early on that these kind of issues cannot be tackled in isolation, but only in collaboration, when you work together, with people. So I think that was one of the most important, lessons that I learned. The second was when we were implementing a project around 3 tiger reserves in India. And the genesis of the project was, after we lost all our tigers from Sariskam. And we began to think, why is it that the local people did not really or why did local people not given the kind of intel or insight that was needed to manage the tiger? Yeah. So we lost them all due to poaching. And that again got us thinking and saying, why is it that people have no pride in living in the backyard of India's national animal? Yeah, I mean, that's so important. So how do you build this kind of a sense of pride? That I live in the backyard of India's national animal. And that was the genesis of another conservation education project that we implemented around these tiger reserves as a pilot. So we worked around 30 schools around each of these tiger reserves, using a very multi-pronged approach, building capacities and, using a top-down approach as well as a bottoms-up approach. So getting it into the system, but also working, with the teachers, themselves. When we first began working in these areas, the schools are small, they are bare, whitewashed walls. You have standard 6, standard 7, standard 8, all in the same classroom. The teacher who's not very well paid, just teaching there. And when I first started there, I said, how do we motivate them? Because we can't pay them, we need them to be motivated to do this kind of conservation work. And that was really challenging. But what we had was our passion. I had a very wonderful team. And what we had was our passion. What we had was the innovative pedagogy that we used to, build this kind of awareness. We designed a whole set of posters. These kids, they lived around the park. They knew most of the birds, but they were not aware of its scientific importance or its importance in the ecosystem, which is very essential. It's essential to build a bridge between traditional knowledge that's known in the home to the scientific knowledge that's imparted in the school, because then you make this link and it strengthens your understanding of what the concept is all about. So we changed this and we said, okay, we have this beautiful set of posters. I can maybe send them to you. It's really nice that, and we told the teacher, paste it around your class. And when I visited one of the schools, I said, didn't you get the posters? They said, yeah, we got it. I said, where are they? It's in the cupboard. The children will tear them. So I haven't put it up. So I had to convince the teacher, I'll give you a second set you to keep in your cupboard, but please put up the posters in the classroom. Yeah. And this changed the classroom. The classroom from these bare whitewashed walls, suddenly became a very colorful kind of an entity. I just like to narrate a story here. It's my favorite story. So when I was outside this little school, which is just outside the gate of the Bandhavgarh Tiger Reserve, and the teacher and I were standing under a tree, talking about the program. And a little boy came to me with a caterpillar on his hand, and the caterpillar had raised its head. Beautiful one. And he said, Madam ji, iska naam kya hai? I'm used to people asking me the names, and my mind goes into that, okay, what is the name? And the teacher said, Arey, dekho, madam, aaj aapko naam pooch raha hai. And I just looked at him. So he says, pehle to isko dekh ke wo kuchal dete the, but aaj ye aapko naam pooch rahe hai. And I then understood the impact that the program had made. It had opened their eyes to a world that they saw but didn't see. Right? And I think to me, that was the success of the program, to see children open their eyes, because you don't need any kind of motivation. That's it. I mean, that is all that one needed to ensure that that child forever would be hooked, to conservation. So I think nature is a great teacher, and the more you expose people to nature, you can get them hooked on, and it works. So that was another important lesson that I learned here. And in the same project, we visited one of the schools, and I was visiting one of the schools. And the headmaster, he told me, "Aap baithiye, madam, exam likh rahe hai bacche." So my team said, we'll just go and have a look and get everything ready. And within about 5 minutes or so, I saw all the students out. And there was this huge commotion. And I asked the headmaster, I thought you said it's half an hour more. He says, no, but they saw your team, man. They've given up the exam paper because they would rather listen to you, than write the paper. So again, an example of how this, got hooked on. And then he said, I had two very young girls, working with me, really, Ashwini and Vishakha, very motivated young girls. And they said, your girls are a model to my girls here. They are really surprised that these girls come from a city and they are staying here, in this wilderness area near the park, and they move about doing this kind of environmental education. It inspires my girls, to be like what your team is. I think that's one of the biggest compliments that we have ever received. So there are many such examples that I think define my journey as a leader. But the crux of all of this has been that working in this field, it's always cooperation, it's collaboration, that can move things forward. I think to me that's been the most important lesson as a leader. I do this exercise of learning spaces with my team and with my group all the time, which is reflecting back on what motivated you to learn, because then it's nice to bring that kind of technology, into your own course. So it's funny that you asked me, because like I said, one of the things I today really value and from which I learned was free play. Yeah. We could play with stones, we could play with shells, we could play with plants, we could play with leaves, and we invented our own games. I mean, I don't know whether I should say this today, but yeah, I was out with the boys thrashing butterflies at some point in time as well. Yeah, because that's something that we did. Yeah. So, but what was important was the free play, where you utilized everything from nature, because we didn't have games. I mean, the kind of games that we had today. So every game that we played used an element of nature. Yeah. And I think this sort of thing has stayed with me. And this is what has also influenced me. And I also try to bring this kind of learning into school programs and into the training programs that we design today. I think firstly, when I got my first scholarship to go abroad as part of the Rotary Group Study Exchange to Australia was a huge eye-opener. So since then, I've been on multiple scholarships, and I've realized the value that intercultural exposure and intercultural training, can bring in, opening up your eyes. So apart from looking at systems and programs, you meet a lot of people who open up their world, and you realize that there is space for another point of view, yeah, which may not necessarily be yours, but it's equally valid. I think this is what all of my scholarships, sort of brought around. The second milestone would be, doing my PhD, because, like I said, I did it much later in life. I was already married. I had a very young daughter, which brings its own challenges. But I have a very supporting family, and I think for my daughter at that young age, I think she was about 3, to see her mother, studying. So I remember I used to sit on the kitchen table because I didn't want to disturb anybody, and I still have this image of her, peeping from the wall and seeing, okay, is my mother, studying? What is she doing? And she coming and sitting on my lap and saying, okay, which chapter are you writing today? I don't think she understood, what a chapter was, but I told her, I'm doing this chapter and this chapter but it brought with itself immense challenges, because I was already doing a lot in my professional work. I was already handling a lot of projects, which is easy, but, handling a daughter and giving her the time that a child needs, and completing your PhD, which is another child by itself, is very challenging. But doing that was another milestone as well. And I would say another one was working with the Department of Science and Technology, the Government of India, in setting up a geospatial capacity building program, across India. So the programs at the DST, they always work with commercial software, and that really limits the reach, because the software is really expensive. And the idea was, okay, if we have to train a large number of young people, professionals across the country, how do we do it? A report by the task force of the Ministry of Human Resource Development had pointed out the huge shortfall that exists in geospatial professionals. And so the idea was, how do you build this capacity? It could be only done by using open source software, which is fairly robust. But of course, commercial and open source software have their own advantages and disadvantages. But if you have to build capacity, then we need to make the technology and the tools available to the population at large. And this resulted in, with the DST, setting up India's geospatial education program through them, setting up a portal, DST-IGET, where trainings across the country today are coordinated as 3-week summer and winter school programs, primarily targeting at college and university, teachers, professionals, young research scholars who are all interested in learning about this technology. So they are very intensive programs, and all done completely with open source software. So as an output of this, we've had more than 5,000, trainees over the years. Courses have been set up in institutions, special papers on this technology have been set up. And it's really coming of age now, because if you would have heard, India's Gati Shakti program now also has geospatial technologies at the background. In fact, everything that we do today has to do with location in some way or the other. So we are users of this technology, but we are looking at, building the capacity for bringing in innovations in technology, or innovations in application of this technology. So I think that was a milestone where I worked and interacted with a lot of professors across the country who are also part of this program. Like in the current cycle, we have 42 universities across who are involved, in imparting this training program. For me, if being highly involved in what I do, there was a very thin line between, what is professional and what is personal. Yeah. So the enthusiasm and the ethics that you had in your professional life, especially in this field, I think also crossed over to the personal life as well. And I always, I always say this when people ask, or when we ask people, okay, you need to, be sustainable. You need to do sustainable initiatives. And I think that is an important milestone for me, and I'll come to it. I had a degree in environmental sciences, so I would consider myself to be highly aware. But it that the kind of degree that we had at that time, or the learning that we had at that time, it didn't really motivate us, to take these strong decisions in our lives, to implement sustainability initiatives. Yes, we did. We were aware. We didn't do certain things, but that strong ethic, was somehow still missing, and it took me some time, to bridge this gap between having the knowledge, being aware, and moving into action. And I think it is true for most of us, right? And we need to see how can education really shorten this gap. What is the kind of tools that you need to use to shorten this gap, right? So, for example, one thing which is very difficult to change is cultural beliefs, right? So, if you look at the Ganesh festival here in Maharashtra, um, we clean our houses, absolutely spotlessly clean, and we install the idol. Yeah, but at the end of the 10th day, one does not think twice about immersing the idol in a river whose water you would not drink. Yeah, where does the cleanliness go? Yeah, so you know this. It's the idol must be immersed. Sure, are there other ways of doing that? Are we willing to question our cultural beliefs? And this takes time, right? It is a process of internalization. Now, internalization of the value that you have, the ethic that you have for conservation. And I realized this. So the day I had this realization that there is a lag between people having the knowledge, being aware, but taking that final step to saying, I will not do this, come what may, needs to be shortened. Yeah. So I think that was a very important milestone for me in my personal life to make the shift to living sustainably. There's a need to question. When constantly there's a need to question. I'm sure when they were brought out at that time, they were very relevant. In Maharashtra, we worked with another program called as the National Green Corps program, which looked at 9,900 schools across the state that we worked in collaboration with the Social Forestry Department of the government of Maharashtra. So they were the implementing agency and we were the resource agency, which means that we were responsible for giving the creative inputs and monitoring the program and doing the training and so on. And we use exactly this theme, the theme of festivals, to get across our message for the environment. So we designed a set of posters, starting right from Nag Panchami, the first festival that we celebrate here in Maharashtra in June, of worshipping snakes. Yeah, and then moving on to Vata Purnima, where the banyan tree is worshipped, and then Dashera, where people distribute the leaves of the kanchan plant. Yeah, and other festivals. Each of these festivals are linked to nature. But if you look at it, on Nag Panchami, snakes are fed milk, all over in rural areas. The snake does not drink milk, it causes asphyxiation, right? So building this awareness that on this day, by doing this particular action, you are not contributing in any way to conservation, required mass awareness. And we designed these very beautiful posters that sort of very simply highlighted the fact. And we did the same with, let's say Vata Purnima. Because in the rural areas, women get together, there's a big tree and they worship it and they go around it and, pray and, all of that. But in the cities where you don't have these kind of trees anymore, you find that a day or so before the festival, the trees in the rural areas are cut and these branches are sold. So the woman gets the branch home, ties it to a chair or to the leg of a table or whatever it is, and then worships it. So where is the belief? Yeah. So we felt that festivals, because they evoke such a strong connection, can be used as a very effective vehicle for talking about conservation. And through these 9,000 schools that we had, we work with um, uh, the students to say, okay, let's plant a tree on this day. You don't have a tree, let's plant a tree. If you have a small tree, please protect that particular tree on this day, because you find it surrounded by all these threads. Yeah, so things like that. Or during the Ganesh, can we say, okay, we will have only one idol in our village? Can we get them together? Can we use immersion tanks? Can we start making clay idols? I think we were one of the first institutions in the state to actually train master trainers to make these clay idols. So we trained several of them across the state and said, let's get this across, to the children. So however crooked an idol may be, a parent will always install that because their child has made it. Yeah. And I can see all of this happening, in this state today. So you have a lot of clay idols today in the market. You have a lot of children making these idols at home. There are these idol making events before the Ganesh. And this is how we saw this change. I mean, I would say that this was one of the largest programs. It was heavily supported by the state government that slowly over a period of 15 to 18 years, definitely brought in change. So the difficulty was in getting people to question their cultural beliefs, very subtly, because these are very touchy things. Yeah. But very subtly, how can we do this? And I think this also was a personal milestone. Everything is a glass half full. So when you are in the circles that I am, it's very easy to get disappointed and be negative. Oh, this is not working. Oh, this is happening. Oh, this is happening. But I think I'm fortunate to have also worked with a group that sees the point. But we always try to see at any issue as a glass half full. There is an opportunity. How can you use that opportunity? So this is a field which is fraught with challenges. It's not an easy field at all. It's not easy to convince, yeah. And especially, getting funding for something like education. We are a university department. At the department, we have masters and PhD courses, right? So we are the only environmental sciences department in the country that has this huge outreach into communities. And we raised a lot of funding for this. But how do we convince? Every funder wants to see the effects in 3 years. It takes everything that you've got, to ensure that your funder is committed for the long term, because the effects of education can only be seen in the long term. So there are challenges at every step. So whether it's the funding, whether it's working together, whether it's looking at how people look at things, even losing cases, it's just one battle. It's not the war. It's only one battle that we lose, and you learn to move on, learn lessons, and start applying it in the next. So I think it's important to have a positive and never die kind of an attitude, when you're working in this field. So there are two things. One is, of course, you can, go in for a degree in environmental sciences and, specialize and learn about sustainability and, apply your knowledge to a wide variety of sectors, in fact, across sectors today that, incorporate sustainability. And it's very rewarding because it's not only a career, it's your life. You have a goal, which is, saving your planet, nothing else, nothing less. So that's it. So it's very rewarding, and I think that's important too. There's never a burnout. You're always wanting to look at something new. There's always a new challenge that you have to face with, you have to deal with, and all of that needs out of the box solutions. So it's challenging in that sense to say, okay, there are no solutions which are written in a book. Yeah, it's not like engineering. I fix a nut here and I fix a bolt there, but it's different. It's social engineering. It's completely different. Yeah. So if you would like to have a career like that, which is a non-stop excitement, I think then this is really the field to be in, where you blend science and social science and people and leadership skills and, communication and education, technology, all of that together. And the other thing is that, you might choose to be an engineer, you may choose to be a doctor, you may choose to be a lawyer. And each of these sectors, environment has a critical role to play, right? So even being in this field, you can make sure that you have sustainable designs. You are ensuring that your law, when you practice, you're looking at environmental issues from the perspective that they need to. Yeah. Even as a doctor, there are issues that one needs to be aware of. Yeah. So all of these things, in whatever career one chooses to be, I think sustainability can be a key tenet, all of that. But yes, doing an environmental sciences job is a roller coaster. So I grew up in a time where which was very different from what is now. But I would say this the support from the family to achieve whatever you want, do whatever you want, was a very strong support at that time. But today, when you have that kind of support in society, I would say the thing is, do what you want. I mean, never let anybody make you believe that you are smaller, you are weaker. Just have the strong belief in your abilities. And I would say seek out mentors, because when you have nothing, I mean, having the support of a mentor can really show you your way forward. Have the discipline, hard work, because that is what pays off in the end. So I think this is the message I would like to give. So discipline, hard work, reaching out where you want to reach, being passionate about what you want to do, and overall being very honest to yourself and to the work that you do. That's very important. So firstly, I think being a sustainable or being a very conscious consumer. Yeah. I think I try to bring that into every aspect of my life. And I try to inculcate that, within my daughter and within my family, as well. Secondly is, it's the small things. So recycling, taking care of your own waste. They're not really time-consuming things, but these are things that need to be done. That's important for me. And what else is important for me is, understanding that I can't really change the whole world, but I can change and influence my circle of influence. Yeah, and hope that I motivate my circle of influence enough that they can influence further their own circles of influence. So this is what I always tell my students. This is the philosophy that I, believe in, and this is the philosophy that I live by. So for me, it's what's more importantly is being a very conscious consumer and incorporating sustainability, wherever I can within my own life. It's I think the passion, it's a passion to do, and the passion that as a teacher, I always feel, and I tell this to all the teachers, you have huge power in your hands. And I feel I have huge power in my hands when I'm able to influence 100 minds in class. I think it is this awareness that, okay, I have the power to influence these people who are going to study with me for a year, for 2 years. I think this is what really pushes me forward. So realizing that I do have this potential to make a difference to people's lives and eventually to the planet. Like I told you, for me, the difference between personal and professional is, very thin. It's what I live, it's what I work, it's become my life. But I love to read. I have a room full of books. I love to cook. I love to cook local. I love to experiment. I love to go for treks. So I think these are some of the things that I do in my in the little leisure time that I have. I don't think so. I don't think that there is anything in my life that I would like to change, simply because I am what I am because of those incidences. And they have contributed immensely to my learning, to my own personal growth. So I don't think I would like to change anything in that. When the Sustainable Development Goals were formulated, and I said, wow, I mean, this is so good. This is really a tool. And over the last couple of years now, we've been intensively working with, education for the goals. And I really would like to imagine a world that would be if the goals were really implemented. So this is something that propels you forward, because the possibility of the goals bringing about a change in everything that we know is so huge. And it's really fascinating to think, what would a world like this be like? So many things. I wish I kept up with my swimming, because I would really like to dive deep into the ocean. Yeah, I've jumped off a cliff early on in my life. That was an amazing experience, just frees you up. But there's so many things that there's so many books that I've bought and never read. My Kindle is, now all full of them. And I always tell my daughter, maybe someday I'm going to get back to reading. So you see this nice book, oh, let me read it. And somehow it just piles on. I mean, there are other things to be done. And write. So there's so much to, write about. There's so much material that can be developed. There's so much that one can do to, make learning more easy, learning more fun. And yeah, I think I always tell my colleagues, I wish I was living on Mars, because it has a longer day, than Earth has.